For a whiskey that comes in at over 125 proof, this is surprisingly drinkable. Let me tell you all about the Apricot Brandy finished whiskey from Two Stacks. Welcome back to the channel. I'm Matt, I'm the whiskey nerd, and like I said, this is a very high proof whiskey from Two Stacks Irish Whiskey. So let me get it into the glass and I'll tell you a little bit more about it. Now, this does come in at 63.2% alcohol, that is 126.4 proof. So it is a very, very high strength alcohol, but it is actually a little bit familiar to me, and it might be familiar to you. This is an extension of the Two Stacks kind of core blend, their kind of complex blend, which is made up of 5 different components. It's made up of 40% dark grain, which was aged in virgin oak casks. It's made up of 40% light grain, which was aged in bourbon cask. It's made up of 8% pot still whiskey, which is aged in Oloroso sherry casks, 10% malt whiskey aged in bourbon casks, and 2% peated malt, which is aged in bourbon casks. So it does have a nice rounded bit of flavor coming through from all those different spirits. But what's interesting about this, it was finished in Apricot Brandy casks for, I believe, about 2 months, which should give it a lot of new kind of flavors, a lot of richness and roundness, and some extra fruitiness. Two Stacks do have a number of these kind of cask strength, different cask finishes. They've got one that was finished in apple brandy casks, port wine casks, cherry brandy casks, Barbados rum casks. So a lot of different kind of innovations there around this core blend of the whiskey, this core complex blend. But we're here today to talk about the Apricot Brandy whiskey. So I think that's enough talking about it. Let's go in for the nose on this really, really high proof but very tasty whiskey. So like I was just saying there's not a huge amount of alcohol burn on the nose. I mean, you can definitely tell there's a bit of heat there, there's a bit of spiciness, there's a bit of kind of weight in the glass, but it is coming in at 63% alcohol, but you don't really get that sense. You think maybe it's around 50% or something like that, because there's so much sweetness and fruitiness coming out of the glass. I mean, yeah, there's some spiciness, yeah, there's a bit of clove, maybe a little bit of like black pepper, a touch of black pepper in there, but it's mostly sweet. You've got caramel, you've got vanilla, you've got brown sugar and toffee, and obviously a huge amount of apricot coming out, because again, like I said, finished in Apricot Brandy cask, so it's going to have a heavy apricot finish. So it does have that kind of almost, if you think of that like the tart apricot juice, when you squeeze an apricot, you get this sticky, kind of jammy, kind of really heavy, syrupy, sugary sweetness coming through, and that's how it comes through on the nose. Yeah, it's apricot, but it's a very, very sweet apricot on the nose. As I'm sitting with it, I'm getting maybe just a little bit of kind of like an orange peel, that kind of citrusy note coming through, and also a bit of like a caramel apple. So if you imagine an apple that's been dipped in caramel, where you got that green apple, that Granny Smith kind of, tart, kind of sharp green apple, rounded out with a bit of caramel. That's kind of the note that's coming through as I sit with the nose. But I think that's enough on the nose. Let's go in for the palate on this whiskey. Cheers. Okay, there is the ABV. It is immediately noticeable when it hits your tongue, like it's kind of hot. As it spreads out, you get that tingly, you get the kind of the part where you salivate in your mouth, but it's not burning, it's just hot. It's quite hot, and I think that's because it's still quite sweet. Like as I was tasting it, a lot of caramel, a lot of toffee, a bit more spiciness coming through, and obviously lots of that apricot, much more like that apricot jam. Like I was saying, on the nose is kind of like that juice, that really kind of sticky, syrupy juice. On the palate, much more like a jammy kind of note, more kind of rounded out, caramelized sugars kind of note. So I'm gonna go in for a second sip and see how it goes. Cheers. Okay, on the second sip, much more apparent that fruitiness, that little bit of citrus I was talking about on the nose, getting that as well. And I'm also interestingly getting a lot more like the spirit influence coming through. And by spirit, I don't mean like that sharp ethanol note you sometimes get with whiskies. This is more like the whiskies that went into the blend. So that grain influence, that virgin oak cask, the little bit of the Oloroso sherry coming through, like a little bit of nuttiness as well. And I'm getting on the tail end like a hint of peat smoke, just a touch, a little bit of a waft of peat smoke, because on the cask strength, I think at least for the Two Stacks whiskies, when it goes up to cask strength, that peat influence does come through a little bit stronger, a little bit more apparent than on the lower proof versions, but it's a very, very nice whiskey. At the end of the day though, those bourbon casks, those sherry casks, they can't really overcome that Apricot Brandy cask, because it's very, very apparent. That apricot note, it's there, it's rich, it's fruity, it's jammy, it's very nice, and it does, I think, help round it out, because this is a very high proof whiskey, but despite that, all that sweetness, all that kind of mouthfeel, that texture rounds it out, keeps it warm, keeps it tingly, but doesn't make it burn. So I'm gonna go in for a final sip, but we're gonna talk about the finish now. Cheers. Okay, the finish on this is warm, as you'd expect. It's long, again, as you'd expect. It's spicy. I'm getting a little touch of As I Breathe, a little touch of oak, that little touch of peat I mentioned, getting that as well, As I Breathe. And then as that kind of, the spiciness fades, the tingliness, the kind of high ABV tingle, that stays, getting a bit of the warming feeling down here, but that caramel, that toffee, that actually lingers on longer. The apricot, it's there, it's present, and it kind of fades off, leaving the caramel, the vanilla, the toffee note, that kind of lingers on the most after the other kind of fruity notes fade off. So it is a nice long kind of finish that goes and goes and goes because of that high ABV presence. Yeah, I mean, that is all there is to say about this whiskey. It's very nice, it's very tasty. It is super high in ABV, but it is very, very drinkable. Like a lot of the whiskeys from Two Stacks, if you try them out, they might be high in ABV, but they're very, very drinkable. Have you had any whiskeys from Two Stacks? If you have, let me know down in the comments below what your favorite one was, because I always love hearing from people like that, letting me know what whiskeys they like while you're down there. If there's a whiskey you want to see me review in future, let me know and I'll try and get my hands on it. And if you're new here, make sure you hit that thumbs up button, hit that subscribe button, because I put out whiskey reviews on Wednesdays, I put out cocktail recipes on Fridays, and I will be putting out a cocktail recipe featuring this Two Stacks Apricot Brandy this Friday. So if you want to see that, make sure you hit subscribe, and I will see you next time. But until then, sláinte.